Today we're going to be creating textured art. I'm so excited by this because this is something I've wanted to try for ages. So I had a proper experiment so I could show you exactly how you can do this at home. The great thing is it's super simple, really affordable and so much fun. You can't really go wrong. I'll be showing you all of the equipment that I've bought to use for these paintings. You can decide what you'd like to use for your one at home. And I ended up doing 3 different canvases just to experiment with a few different styles. This was honestly the best fun I've had in a long time, so I can't wait to jump into the tutorial. Let's go. So I'm starting with a stretched canvas. This is an 8x10 size canvas and it comes fully primed. If your canvas isn't already primed, I would recommend priming it with some gesso first. And if you are using a canvas like this, they often come with these wooden tabs at the back. These are for stretching out the back of the canvas, but if you don't want to use them for stretching, you can always experiment and use them as a tool to apply your filler. I have an all-purpose filler here in white. I just got this in Poundland. If you're in the UK, Poundland is great. If not, maybe like the dollar store in the US or any hardware store. I've then got a palette knife and I picked up some of these. These are essentially sort of cake making design, so you can use these to create different patterns and styles on the top of cake. This is the filler. It comes in the colour white. It does come out slightly more creamy, but it looks almost like frosting, and this is what we're going to use. So I'm just going to start with my palette knife, scooping some up, and we're just going to smudge it onto our canvas. With this, I would just recommend having a little play around with the way you're applying the filler to your canvas. You can do this in any way that you want. There's literally no right or wrong. Just have a little experiment with what you prefer, what you're feeling on the day. You might want to change it up. You might have something in mind that you want to experiment with. It might be that you want to try different tools. I'm trying this little tab that came on the back of the canvas, and I'm also going to just try one of these kind of bigger smudgers, I like to call them now. This is sort of better, I think, if you're using a bigger canvas. It does kind of work the filler into the canvas quite well, so it makes it quite smooth, whereas actually I quite enjoyed just using the palette knife just because you've got a little bit of extra texture. I just had an experiment with a few different mark making techniques within the filler just to see what works well. You can try a few different tools as well if you want to. I think just have an experiment. The great thing about this is you can just smudge it all out and blend it back in as well. So I'm sticking to my palette knife. I just preferred it for this painting. And I'm just working this filler into the canvas. I'm working quite quickly, but it didn't dry quickly. I also had the windows open because the filler was a little bit potent in smell, and I just recommend always having some sort of ventilation when you're using any form of material like this. So just make sure you've got the windows or the doors open. I didn't spend too long on this. I didn't want to overly work it, and I tried to leave the filler quite thick as well so that it would dry nicely and nice and textured. So I'm just going to pop this to the side to dry and move on to my next canvas. So I'm using exactly the same materials for this, my all-purpose filler, my spatula or palette knife, and this little device that I've got to create some zigzags in the art. So I'm just scooping out some of the filler now. Again, just smudging it onto that canvas. It's up to you how much filler you used. I decided not to go all the way to the edges. I kind of go right up close to the edges, but I didn't sort of bring it right round. It's quite nice just to have a little play around with how you're applying it, how thick you want it. It's honestly so satisfying to do. I really want you to try it. So I want to create quite a thick back layer for this one because I'm going to use the little zigzag tool to create a pattern in the middle. I found this really relaxing to create, and you can really spend ages just changing the design of your work. Once I was happy with how much filler I had in the background, I then picked up my zigzag tool and I just wanted to create quite a big shape, almost in a wave pattern along the middle. So I'm just dragging it up, creating that curve, pushing down enough so that it's making a mark in the filler, but not too hard that it's going straight through to the canvas. The nice thing about this is if you don't like what you've done, you can just smudge it all out and start again. I quite like this, I like the simplicity of it, so I thought that would do for the second one, and I'm going to move on to my third and final canvas now. Again, I'm using exactly the same thing, so just using my palette knife and some of the filler, and I wanted to keep this design quite thick and quite simple and focus it more in the middle of the painting, almost like a 3D sculpture that sort of sticks out from the middle of the canvas. So I just focused on smudging it around. The word smudging is appearing quite a few times in this video. Good old smudge. I decided not to overwork it. It's really tempting to overwork it just because it's so fun to create, but I just wanted to keep this one really simple. Just have some thicker areas that are really kind of protruding from the canvas. So I didn't allow myself too much time to work on this because I thought the longer I have to work on it, the more I'm going to sort of play and I might end up messing it up. So I kept it very, very simple. I actually really love this one. I think it's my favourite out of the three, but they all work really well together. So what I did was I just popped them down. I just wanted to leave them to dry. You could probably leave them, depending how thick you've been, for a couple of hours, but I decided just to play on the safe side and I left them overnight to completely dry. But there they are all together, and I do think that they work really nicely as a kind of little series of textured artworks. The next day when I came back to them, they were nice and hardened. Some of the little areas were flaking off ever so slightly, but not really, not too much. And the bigger, thicker areas, as you can see here, are really dry. What I wanted to do now is just take it a step further, and I wanted to paint them all. They have dried pretty white, but they are slightly more cream in colour rather than the canvas. So I decided just to take a couple of brushes, you can use any size brushes that you want, and just some white acrylic paint, and I'm simply going to paint over the whole of the canvas with the white paint. You just want to make sure that you're getting into all of the nooks and crannies, and I also just thought this was a nice way to sort of seal the filler to the canvas. It just adds an extra layer of protection, so I'm really focusing it on the areas where the filler meet the canvas on the edges, just to give it almost like a little bit of glue. I don't know if this helped, I don't think you need to, but I just wanted to paint it white anyway, and I just thought it wouldn't hurt giving it that extra little bit of protection. I found here as well where I was brushing over any of the areas that were slightly looser, they were just coming off onto the paintbrush, which wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't all coming off, just little bits that were flaking, and then the rest just smoothed on quite nicely. I just made sure I did a pretty even layer over the whole thing, really making sure that I was covering up any of the areas that were slightly more difficult to get into, which is why it's quite nice to have a few different paintbrushes if you feel like you need to use a smaller one to get into all of those little areas, all of those little details. I then went ahead and did exactly the same thing on both of the other canvases, just really focusing it on the area where the filler met the canvas again, just to sort of varnish it, glue it in, and I just gave it a very light coating with this white. You can see that the white is slightly brighter. I used a titanium white in acrylic paint, and the filler, although it is a white shade, it's slightly more cream. You can really paint these any colour that you want. Again, with this one, I just made sure that I was being really careful getting into all of those grooves just to make sure that they were nice and covered. So as you can see, this type of art is super effective, but also really easy and very fun to do. You don't need that many materials. It's not expensive. You can kind of get lost in your mark making, and they just make for really effective, lovely art for your homes, which you can try time and time again in a different way. I hope you all enjoyed this. If you did, then do be sure to give us a little subscribe and a thumbs up and a comment below to say hi. It's always nice as well. Thanks everyone. Bye.